Welcome to One on One on the Fight Network. To fans of professional wrestling, his voice has been the soundtrack of the industry for over 3 decades. It's a pleasure to welcome the legendary Jim Ross. Jim, thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
Let's go right back to the beginning, Jim, when you began working under Leroy McGuirk in the Mid-South territory. Was professional wrestling something you always looked to have a career in?
Well, I don't know if I was hoping to pursue a career in it, but I was always a fan. I watched, religiously every week. I don't know that I watched it looking at my potential vocation, but I certainly watched it as a devout fan of the product. And then it was the days before cable and internet and everything. So there was 3 channels on TV, and there was usually always wrestling on one of the channels. The local stuff. So I was always a fan, and I started watching in the early '60s.
Talk to us a bit about how you got your early education within the industry and how much Leroy McGuirk helped you with that.
Well, Leroy was blind. He had lost an eye as a 9 or 10-year-old kid. Then he went to Oklahoma A&M, which is now called Oklahoma State. Was a national champion wrestler, and then became a pro wrestler, NWA champion, a big star when the junior heavyweights were really in vogue back in the 40s, in that era, 30s, 40s, 50s. Then about 51, Leroy had a car accident, and it took his other eye. So at the pinnacle of his prime, he lost his sight. He bought into the promotion in Tulsa, in that territory, and eventually became the owner of the territory and the promoter. Now, some of the things some of his drinking was not real admirable, and his temper was a little gnarly. But if you discount all that stuff, and like anybody has issues from time to time or problems, he was a hell of a good guy, and I thought he got a bad hand, and sometimes people said he was bitter, but everybody I talked to about it had never been in his position. A star athlete losing his sight in his prime. He never saw his wife. He never saw his daughter. So it was a unique life, to say the least. But he was a very unique mentor in my early years, formative years.
You had a number of different roles in that territory. How much did that experience help you later in your career?
Well, I was making $125 a week all in, and I paid my own taxes. I had no medical benefits, independent contractor, paid my own expenses at $125 a week with a new wife and myself to support. I did whatever I was called upon to do, and anything I could do to make extra money, I did. I was on the ring crew, and I refereed. I promoted small events. I was discovered promoting small events in college by Bill Watts, and Watts is the one that brought me to McGuirk. They were partners. And I handled, over the years, I handled all kinds of projects, but in the early going, it was basically grunt work. Whatever, sweeping the ring, putting the ring up, refereeing. I stuck with it and got an education, and I knew that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be a referee, and I didn't want to work on the ring crew. So I knew that for me to stay in the business, I had to figure out something else to do that would be better.
So how did the commentary come about? Was that something you always wanted to do?
I was going to be a broadcaster in some shape, form, or fashion as a kid. I thought that I had my aptitude for telling a story was somewhat viable from all the colorful relatives I had that were good storytellers. And I started giving speeches in high school and had some success there. And I had my eye on broadcasting. I never had specifically pointed out I'm going to do wrestling, about broadcasting in general. And I like boxing, and I love football. It's my sport. I like baseball, basketball. I liked everything. I was a sports guy. I was the only child, so I read a lot, watched a lot of sports on TV. I had a transistor radio, listened to the St. Louis Cardinals, Harry Carey and Jack Buck almost every night they were on. So I had great role models there. And, you know, my first broadcasting partner was Leroy McGurk, who was blind. So to do wrestling play-by-play on TV with a blind partner, you had to learn quickly to be descriptive and to be expressive and to engage him in what he was hearing verbally. I probably over-broadcast things in the early going. In other words, if my partner had not been totally blind, I probably would have been more of a TV broadcaster. Instead, I had to do a little radio to engage him.
We've got to take a quick break. When we come back, more Jim Ross here on One on One. Welcome back to One on One on the Fight Network. Today we're chatting with legendary professional wrestling announcer Jim Ross. One of the staples of the Mid-South territory was their TV show. Bill Watts had the theory that if you present a compelling on-air product, that it would drive people to the live events, whereas other promoters wouldn't want to give away too much. Tell us a bit about working on that innovative television show.
Well, Watts, when he was on his game and he was motivated, was a great producer of episodic TV. And that's the key. It's got to be episodic. It's not freestanding broadcast. You've got to wrap up what occurred last week and segue it into this week, and then take it out of this week, and so that you have a reason to want to tune in next week. And I thought we had a good blend of marquee main events and other matches that were not as compelling. You know, the deal was that the better your rating, the better relationship you have with your station, the more people that watch the TV show, the more people that were potentially going to buy a ticket. Then the only money you were making was off ticket sales. There was no pay-per-view. There was no systematic marketing and licensing programs. So you had to drive the live event. That was your deal. And we did that by engaging our audience in episodic television and making sure they could get a little sample of what it's like for the top guys to perform on TV, and sometimes against each other. But the matches would always then forward their story. And to see the culmination of the story was the impetus for buying a ticket. So he was real good at balancing things. You know, it wasn't just a TV ratings thing. Our first priority was selling live event tickets.
As well, something that comes out of that topic is that Mid-South presented a very realistic product, very real, and it doesn't compare well to today's version of professional wrestling, but it does compare very well to the UFC.
Today's MMA is a lot like several territories in their day that emphasized athleticism, competitiveness, and more steak than sizzle. And Mid-South was long on the steak, and you know, the confrontations and physicality, and you knew why the matches were taking place. You understood why the two adversaries, the two competitors were adversarial. We tried to explain our stories, not reinvent the wheel. You know, and create rivalries, and this rivalry exists because of whatever the reason was. So I think that my first really getting involved in doing play-by-play on pro wrestling was not a lot different than some of the guys of today that are doing MMA. To me, it's the interchangeable parts. Now the MMA purists won't like that because they have bought into a lot of mainstream people's pro wrestling bias. That's existed for years. You know, you get a great story and it's done eyebrows up or winking at you, you know, and the grunt and groan boys had a sellout Friday night, and I took my kid, and it was the articles are more entertainment or human nature oriented than they are about the event itself. So many people have ego issues that they want people to know that pro wrestling is staged, and so I don't understand. I've never understood those insecurities. I know a lot of people have them, but we defied the pro wrestling bias in our territory because we had legitimate athletes that were had credentials and that had a body of work before we got them, whether it be in college or the NFL or wherever it might be. They were accomplished performers and athletes. So we overcame the pro wrestling bias by and large, because if you watched our product, you'd say, God, those guys are really hitting each other. And they were. They worked very, they were very aggressive. And Watts would not tolerate guys that work light. Guys that were not physical didn't really make any money. They didn't last long. They'd move on to another territory.
You were at the forefront of the sale of the UWF to Jim Crockett Promotions. We've seen interpromotional feuds in the past, and this one just didn't seem to get the time it deserved. You were there. What exactly happened?
I brokered the sale of the UWF to the NWA, Crockett's group, because Watts wasn't a big fan of Jimmy Crockett for whatever reason. And I was working with them on doing some co-promoted events, like in the Superdome and some other things. I knew Bill was getting burned out, was having some other marital issues, was just tired. You know, it's hard to run your own territory, be the top star, be the director, the producer, the owner, write the checks, you know, manage. It's just, he's doing a lot, and he built a great business. So I made the offer to Crockett that we were willing to sell. McMahon was getting bigger, and Crockett wanted to compete. You know, it looked like for a while that it was going to be a three-team race, WWF, UWF, and NWA. A lot of the local promotions had withered away or been bought out, or they just self-destructed. More self-destructed than, you know, McMahon gets the onus of the honor, if you will, of that he put the territories out of business, which is really kind of ludicrous. But the Crockett thing, my vision was you have two separate brands, you keep them separate. You do like the NFL has tried to do and create some parity. You expose the UWF guys in their matches and their issues on TBS, your national cable overlay. You build both brands. Once a year you can have a Super Bowl on pay-per-view, and you have the UWF versus the NWA. You can have trades. This guy gets stale here, he can be fresh there. You don't run the same markets. You break it up, service the markets that, you know, that works. And it was a great concept on paper, but obviously in the history will say and show that the practical application of it was a failure. And people could say, well, why did it fail? I don't know if it was Jimmy Crockett didn't have the vision enough to pull the trigger. I don't know if it was creative issues and ego. You know, normally in wrestling, pro wrestling, when there's major issues, it's usually one of two things: money or creative. And creative could also be creative/ego. So if there's a big, this guy left this territory, this guy left, WWE, this guy walked out on NWA, this guy did this. Why'd they do these things? It's generally money, or they didn't like the creative direction based on their ego. They wanted to either be the star. I want to play quarterback. I don't want to play end. I am a quarterback. Well, I got a quarterback. Well, then I'm out of here. I'm a better quarterback than the one you got. Well, that's ego. They didn't like the creative. So it failed, and it could have been I think it could have been a success. But that was after Crockett acquired it. He developed financial problems that were probably already in place when he bought the brand, and it never launched. A lot of people blame Dusty Rhodes for his booking. That story's been worn out. A lot of people say, well, it was the egos of the guys who are closest to Crockett in the NWA that didn't want the other guys in the other brand to be stars and take up their TV time on TBS, their big national platform. That's ego. And then they didn't want the incumbents didn't want the new guys to get over because they would make more money. So it come back to money and ego. So it didn't work, and it was unfortunate. And of course Crockett got in his financial problems, and then here comes Ted Turner.
Now you fast forward to 2001 when the WWF purchased WCW, and you were attempting to take a WCW audience and move it over to a WWF product. Was it destined to fail, and did you see a lot of parallels with the Jim Crockett purchase of UWF?
I think that the WCW Invasion could have lasted longer in hindsight creatively than it did. I think if you're a student of the game and you do your homework, we could all say in hindsight that the WCW Invasion was underutilized in WWE. It did real well when it was, for a time. That was a matter of doing more long-term planning, and I think that the general consensus was that it had run its course, and that we needed to do something new and fresh, and integrate those stars into the parent brand. There probably was at some point different, egocentrically driven issues that, the WWE was going acquired WCW, and that we had squeezed all the fruit out of all the juice out of the fruit, and now it's time to move on. I will certainly accept my share of the culpability of that, because I was involved in management at that time. I'd like to be able to say I was some sort of a savant or some genius that, I didn't really know. I thought it had more legs than we got out of it, but to tell you we could have done 3 more pay-per-views or 2 more years, that's all that is speculation. But unfortunately it didn't work. And I think, again, if you go back and look at it, and if we had a chance to do it all over again, yeah, I think it probably would have been structured a little differently and create a little bit more of a race. It got complicated, it got a little bit convoluted and watered down. We tried to do alternate announcers, and it got to be kind of watered down. The announcer should have been able to do a WCW match as easily as a WWE match. I think we overthought it a little bit.
One of the other elements, Jim, is that in order to make that invasion work, you would have had to have brought in the major names such as Hulk Hogan, Bill Goldberg, and Kevin Nash, but all of those guys had their guaranteed contracts from WCW, and bringing them in would have completely upset the pay structure in the WWF.
Well, some of those guys didn't want to work. They had guaranteed contracts. Yeah, so why would you want to hire an unmotivated performer? I had no interest in that. I don't care how big their name was. It's not good in the locker room. We weren't our issues were not really pay structure as much as we weren't going to blow up our model for anybody. That's just the way it was. We had a model and a fair model, and a lot of guys there made in ridiculous sums of money. And I'm very happy for that. That's one of my greatest contributions, I think, at least personally, is that I was able to be in a position to facilitate some guys to earn a truckload of money. And the heartbreaking part of that is that some of them didn't take care of it. But that can be said of, where can it not be said? The NHL can say it. Every ex-hockey player that's been a big money guy is not sitting on Easy Street right now. It's just a fact. It's life. We didn't have what was perceived to be the stars overall, but we had some good guys. We had some real good guys. But when you go to guys that have guaranteed deals, and they can sit home and make the same amount of money or more than we were going to pay them, we waited. I remember talking to Rey Mysterio in Los Angeles, and he had a guaranteed WCW deal, and I said, I can't touch this number. You'll make more money here than that contract, but you're not going to get it guaranteed. You get a great contract guaranteed, and then the sky is the limit, and you will be motivated and incentivized to go out and get it done. And you'll blow that number that you're guaranteed away. But if I were you, if I was your manager, I'd say take the time off, get healthy, spend time with your family, let this contract run out, take this big bread, and when you're ready, let's talk and sign you up and get you going. And that's what we did. And he's been there ever since, making a lot more money than he made at WCW. But at the time, not making near the money guaranteed. So it depends on where you are. It depends on what I've always been one that believed that one of WCW's big fallacies was they gave guys comfort zone money and they had no incentives. I don't care if I play. I don't care if I start. I don't care how many minutes I have on the ice. My deal's guaranteed. It's about me. It's not about the team. So I didn't like that philosophy. And ironically, all those guys that people talk about, Hogan and Nash and Hall and Goldberg, they all came. They all came eventually. So I don't think not having a certain cluster of talents that had a lot of skills and a lot of name identity and star power was the culprit on the WCW Invasion not working longer. I just think it was basically thought that it was a storyline that had run its course, and it was time for us to move on, and that's what we did.
It's interesting about the guaranteed contracts because you look at some of the main event talent in WCW who had their guaranteed contracts and didn't have that incentive to work hard, whereas over in Japan, the model is the same with guaranteed contracts, but the main event talent there worked very hard.
Well, the guys in Japan had a different model, though, in their deal was, I want to work less days a year, less weeks a year, monetize my days or my weeks I'm going to be gone. If I do well enough there, I'm going to get bonused, and they did. The stars got taken care of above and beyond their contracts. And if I do really well and I create an awareness of my work, then the other brands in Japan are going to covet me when contract time comes. So they went to Japan, and they had a small country, and they became stars on national TV and major TV outlets. And then they put themselves in position because of competition to move from Inoki to Baba or wherever it may be. But those guys always got taken care of. Their motive, though, was that they didn't want to work a full schedule. So they'd work so many tours a year and call it a day. So it was a little different model than the domestic model in North America, where you have a weekly TV show and you're doing live TV, and the TV became more omnipotent and the live events more important. And so it's a little different deal. I like the fact you pay a guy a fair wage and a good contract. So if he's injured, he knows what he's going to earn and be able to get sent to his mailbox, take care of his family. But you never pay anyone money where they're done. You got to keep them motivated. And I'm sure that there's wrestlers that'll, well, yeah, that's the way the office wants it. Well, that's the way any team wants it, if they're smart. You keep guys motivated. You keep competition going. You don't want anybody to get complacent. And so you know that if I guaranteed a guy $500,000, but I knew he's probably going to make $1.5 million or $2 million, I want him to know that he's going to make $1.5 million or $2 million, because he's going to come to work, he's going to stay in shape, he's not going to be a problem, and he's going to go out and do his job. That's all you ask him to do. Just do your job. Don't try to screw the system. And if you're unhappy, then you go to your superiors or your administrators and express your unhappiness. And I've had a lot of guys do that. You let them, you try to facilitate them leaving. I've always had a philosophy that if I can't solve your problem, I need to eliminate it. It sounds crass and callous and hard-nosed and big shot. It's not. You do everything you can to solve the problem. And if you come to the end of the day and you just absolutely can't solve it, you can't keep it. You can't embrace the problem. You have to get rid of the problem. If I can't solve it, I have to eliminate it. That's the way it is.
And in your role as Vice President of Talent Relations, you were often positioned as the bad guy, whether it was fair or not.
I had one of the most hated roles in all of pro wrestling as the head of talent. You got to deliver all the bad news without question. And you tried to balance it out with good news. But you can deliver bad news without being confrontational or abrasive or power hungry. And I like to think that I was not that way. I'm sure that, again, in that role, it's inherent that people are going to say Jim Ross was a prick, or Jim Ross was a jackass, or whatever. Hey, and I'm sure that there are guys that played for coaches in various sports, or worked in film or television for various directors that said, "Well, oh, man, you don't work with that guy. He's not a good guy." I don't I don't believe I was ever a bad guy, but I know I had to deliver plenty of bad news and deal with lots of bad issues. So that came with a job. I knew that when I accepted the terms, that you have to cut people, you got to fire people, you got to send people to rehab, you got to set people down and try to give them some mentoring and leadership. My job was to recruit great people and good young athletes and guys that I could see that I thought were going to be contributors. And then sometimes like on any team, you make a bad recruit, or the recruit goes bad or whatever, or they didn't materialize, or they developed problems that you couldn't solve. So you eliminated them and you move on. So it was a tough job, but I enjoyed what we accomplished. I thought our body of work during the mid to late 90s to early 2000s was exemplary. I thought that my team assembled the best roster in the history of the business. And I know for a fact that we drew more money than any period from any territory or any company in the history of the business. So, and I know that we helped manufacture a lot of millionaires. So I think at the end of the day, I won. I had a lot of wins there, so I was happy.
We're going to head to a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our special 1-hour chat with Jim Ross.